Good morning to everyone present this morning. I hope that what we are going to discuss this morning may obviously help us to continue growing, as we are always excited to find such opportunities to discuss and learn from the law of the Lord. Our reading this morning was taken from the book of 1 Samuel. Of course, that was a wrong reading. It was supposed to have been reading chapter 4, verse 1 to 3, which is what was done this morning. I will take that reading again, as I'm going to be making some comments as we read. Then we are finally going to make some applications and see what kind of lessons we can actually learn from this passage. In fact, the background to chapter 4 will actually begin in chapter 2 of the book of 1 Samuel. In the second chapter of the book of 1 Samuel, we see the children of Eli being introduced to us. Their names, these two young men, were called Hophni and Phinehas. Eli was the priest at this particular time. Of course, we know that we are almost approaching the twilight of the period of the judges. Perhaps 300 plus years have gone past now from the time that the first man called Othniel became judge of Israel. And of course, for the successive years that came, they were under the period of the judges. And we know, as we were studying the other time from the book of Judges, that this period is characterized by disobedience to God. You may remember the vicious cycle that we actually studied about this period, where these people were never doing things that were right. And of course, God would actually punish them for that. So that has not yet changed until this time when Eli is almost approaching the twilight of his life. So when he was now old, his sons, two of them, Hophni and Phinehas, almost by default took over the work of a priest. But these young men were very wicked. In fact, if you turn with me to the second chapter, they are actually described exactly the same thing. In verse 12, we read that now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. And of course, we know what it means. If the Bible talks about someone who did not know the Lord, doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't know anything about the Lord. But there is somebody who doesn't observe or become obedient to the law of God. Then right there in chapter 2, verse 17, thus the sin of the young men, that is Hophni and Phinehas, was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. There are so many things that are said about these two young men. In fact, their father at some point actually engaged them and he wanted to talk to them. So God is not happy. And we have talked about the errors during this period, one of them being retribution. God is going to allow them to be taken by the enemy. In this particular case, when we get to chapter 4, the enemy are the Philistines. So then that gives us the reading. And the word of Samuel, of course, Samuel is mentioned as being chosen in the third chapter. The other part of verse 1 says, now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the field of the battle. And when the troops came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies. Israelites would never cease to amaze. You know, if you really think about their solution here to the problem, they have been defeated by the Philistines. And their solution to the problem is, for us to win the battle, we need the ark of God to be amongst us, or to be close by. The ark of God is somewhere in the tent in Shiloh, and they wanted it to be there. Somebody has to be having the burden of carrying the ark while others are advancing. That's what is in their mind. But there's one thing, or several others at least, that they forget. That at this particular time, when their forefathers, over 300, perhaps 400 plus years now, were saved from Egypt, there was no Ark of the Covenant which did that. So who saved them? Now that the Ark was not there. When they were led and conquered, of course, under Moses, we know that they conquered many kings under Moses. In fact, we are actually told in the book of Numbers, chapter 12, combined, Moses and Joshua conquered over 33 kings. So when they conquered over 33 nations, defeating 33 kings, where was the Ark of God? It was never mentioned. It was never carried in battle. When Jericho fell, of course, under the leadership of Joshua, we know that they just marched around Jericho in total of 13 times, and the mighty walls of Jericho fell. Where was the Ark of the Covenant? They didn't need it at the time. For 300 years, under the leadership of the judges, beginning with Othniel, now we are 15 of them that are actually mentioned in the book of Judges, ending with Samson. There is no mention of the Ark of the Covenant being taken to battle. Why should it be taken now? Of course, that's being experimental. They think and they believe that if they have the Ark, then they are going to win the battle. In verse 4, so the people sent to Shiloh and brought from there the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the Ark of the Covenant of God. These actually are the problem, not the Ark itself. But in fact, they are going to bring those who are problematic to be leading the charge. They are the ones who are the priests who are going to be carrying the Ark of God when it was taken to be brought to the battlefront. The problem would not be solved, of course, by the presence of the Ark of God. Such line of thinking actually, limits the capabilities and abilities of God. We know God is able. We know God is not limited by a certain, he can't be confined. In fact, I'm thinking about the story we read in 1 Kings chapter 20. At that particular time, Ahab was the king. Of course, we know Ahab being the husband of Jezebel. He was the king at the time. So he's going to embark on a war, and he fought against the Syrians. And he defeated the Syrians. And the Syrians also had the same kind of thinking that, I think the reason why we lost to the Hebrews today is because we fought with them in the mountains. Because their God is very strong in the mountains. So if we want to win against them, let us draw them to the valley. If we go with them to the valley, we're going to defeat them. So they are going to make sure that the next encounter is going to be fought in the valleys. And they were still bashed by the Israelites. So it was not where they were situated. God can fight from anywhere. He can fight from the deep of the waters. He can fight from the mountains. He can fight from the valley. He can fight without the Ark of the Covenant. The children of Israel at this particular time are not realizing that. They are, short-sighted to think that they needed the Ark to be there, presently with them. God does not need to be there physically, even in your life, even in my life. We know that God does not need to be there so that I'm going to be walking with him while he's there physically. That's not how God operates. We should not limit him. In fact, we need to remove sin because God does not associate with sin. If we have sinned, as they had sinned at the particular time, the priests were so horrible. Hophni and Phinehas were so wicked. In fact, they were adulterers. All that is not, but they think if they bring the Ark of God, it's going to save them. Of course, that was not going to happen. I see people in our day to day, of course, inviting God only when they are in trouble. And of course, they expect miracles to be done. In fact, the most important time when people think about God is when they have fallen on hard times. At times when the machine is cruising and we don't have a problem in our lives, we tend to forget God. In fact, God should always be invited all the time, under all circumstances. We should make sure that we have him. We don't need to seek him like they are seeking the Ark of the Covenant. To some extent, they were right, because God had told them, in fact, they knew that the two tablets that carried the 10 Commandments were in the Ark of the Covenant. They knew that God had said, you need to make a mercy seat, which is going to be above the Ark of the Covenant. And God had said, that's where I am going to be sitting. So according to them, if I bring the Ark of the Covenant, I have actually brought God. To some extent, physically, they were right, because that's what God had said. But they didn't need to bring God with them to the fight, because he was already with them, but he had dispersed them, because they actually had sinned. You know, you look today in our world, and you see so many people who believe in so many artifacts. Some believe in so many paraphernalias. Think of those wristbands. Think of, some chains around their neck. There are so many things that people actually believe in today, thinking that those things are powerful. In fact, I laughed the other time when someone said, what is very funny with people is that they are the ones who believe that a wristband from some charlatan who calls himself a prophet is going to save them. Yet the same person who owns the artifact himself, the same person who is called the prophet, he actually doesn't have it on his head. In fact, he actually trusts, whenever you see them coming out of their vehicles, they actually have aides, security people that are around them. But you actually believe that a wristband is going to save you. Yet they actually don't even believe in those wristbands. They believe in physical human beings to protect them. I read a card, I was following a card some other time, which was written, big emblazonment on the back, and it was written, this car is 100% protected by past prophetic eye. There is somebody who doesn't even believe that there is a God. This car is not protected by God. It's actually protected by past prophetic eye. We know there is an old man who passed away some 2 weeks ago. He's actually made to be a hero in terms of religion, so they say. They say he converted many people. Of course, we know he didn't convert anyone to Christ because he himself was not a Christian. He didn't even know Christianity himself. But he was made a hero, and this man was buried last Sunday, I think he was. During his lifetime, this is a man who misled so many people to believe that if you are walking into the house of one of his members, you should actually, the first thing that should greet you is this man's portrait. If you don't have his picture in your house, then you are not protected. So many people actually believe in that. And this person just died 2 weeks ago. So who is protecting them now? It's actually this line of thinking which is so limited, the same line of thinking that the Jews are having on this day, to think that if we bring the Ark of God alongside us as we are fighting, the Ark is actually going to help us. Let's continue with the story and let's discover something new. So in verse 5, as soon as the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout, so that the earth resounded. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, what does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean? And when they learned that the Ark of the Lord had come to the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, a God has come into the camp. And they said, woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. At least they had a memory of what these gods, according to them, they had done. Of course, we know it would be God who had done this. Verse 9. And I think this was their defining moment. So they are trembling. They know that these gods can decimate us, but they are not going to run away. Listen to what they are going to do in verse 9. They actually are going to encourage each other and say, take courage and let us be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight. I'm calling this a defining moment in this battle at least. Because even though the Philistines had identified and somehow had associated the Ark of the Covenant with the extraordinary power, they said, we are not going to run away. We are going to face the battle and we are going to fight. Otherwise, if we lose this battle, we are actually going to be slaves. The same way we had enslaved the Hebrews. This was their defining moment. Taking a bull by its horns, if you would want to use that phrase. They are not surrendering and they are saying we are going to fight. Verse 10 tells us what they are going to do. So the Philistines fought and Israel was defeated. With the Ark of the Covenant, they are going to be defeated. And they fled, every man to his home, and there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. Over and above 4,000 that had already fallen, 30 more thousand are going to fall. By now, 34,000 from the army of God has died. Even though they now have the Ark of God with them, actually more people are going to die. And the question is why? So the solution was not bringing the Ark into the battle. The solution was for them to look into where the problem was coming from. And they fixed that. They did it. They brought the Ark of God. And the Ark of God even was captured. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, actually died. So even with the Ark present, they still were defeated. The question is why? Even the Ark itself was captured. The commanders were killed. So what's next for the Israelites? What they thought would provide solution for them, it also has been captured. And of course, when we turn into the 5th chapter, we are going to see the ark that has been taken into the territory of the Philistines. Verse 1 says, when the Philistines captured the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. We of course know that the Philistines had 5 cities, that each of the city was of course ruled by a governor, or they actually called them lords. So they actually had one of the cities that is mentioned here is called Ashdod, and the other one was called Ashkelon. The other one was called Gaza. Gath was the other one, and the other one was called Ekron. So it's going to go, the Ark of God is going to go to at least 3 of these places. Verse 2 says that then the Philistines took the Ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it up beside Dagon. Dagon was actually the one who was their God. So they obviously would have a statue in their temple of Dagon. So they are going to bring the Ark of God, of course, in the same room with the Dagon. This is where our lesson is actually going to come from later on when we make the application. Verse 3 says, and when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, behold, Dagon had fallen face down on the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. But when they rose early on the morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. This is why the priests of Dagon and all who enter the house of Dagon do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. Verse 6 says, the hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. Let's stop there and think about this. So, Hophni and Phinehas leading the army of God. They thought if they brought physically the ark in the battle, the ark was going to do the fighting for them. But that, of course, was not God's mind. So God is going to allow the ark to be captured. And the ark is now in a foreign land, being handled by foreign people. So what you could actually have there associated with God and Israel is the ark. There is no Israelite who has been captured, only the ark. But look at what the ark is now doing on its own to show that God does not need to be carried, when we are fighting battles. We need to call upon him. The ark went there and is going to cause Dagon to die. Dagon was already dead because he was a stature anyway. But by death, I mean in this particular case, he is going to be decapitated. There's no knife, there's no axe, there's nothing, no machete that was brought, to remove all these, hands and legs. It fell on its own, and it actually was destroyed. When God fights his enemies, he does not need help from you. Neither does he need help from me. Neither did he need help from Hophni or Phinehas or the Israelites on the day. When God fights, he fights on his own. He may give enemies some measure of victory, which he will completely reverse once he has decided to do that. Imagine when the Philistines were fighting against the Jews, and they were able to capture. Initially, they were very scared when they saw the ark came. But because of their courage, they captured the ark and they went with it. Imagine the celebration they must have been going through having managed to capture that which they thought was their biggest fighter, they captured it and they went with the ark. But the ark is going to turn against them, and the ark is actually going to be fighting for itself, because God is actually fighting. The Philistines were given some temporary victory, but of course God is going to overturn that. The other thing that I want us to see there is this. So when the ark is going to be put and is pitted against Dagon, I don't know what the Philistines wanted to prove. How would you bring the ark of God of heaven in the same room with Dagon, who was made by your hands? So they are going to put Dagon on one side, and they are going to put the ark on the other side. And of course, what happened. That's what we were reading there. I don't know what was in their mind, but to some extent, should be pardoned to believe or think that they wanted to see who was more powerful than the other. And actually, the ark proved who was powerful, because God and Satan cannot dwell under one roof. God and Satan cannot dwell under one roof. The ark of God and the Dagon of the Philistines could not stay together. They can't. In fact, I have a big lesson from this. And this is the lesson that I want to share with you. If God comes into my life, and I really allow him to come into my life, and if God comes into your life, and you really surely allows him to be in your life, the devil should disappear. Because God and Satan cannot dwell together. This morning we were talking from Psalms chapter 15. And one of the things that we were studying from there are some of the sins that we practice and we do on each and every day of our lives. One of them, of course, that stood out was lying. And we talked about it, which was true, that many of us don't hesitate to lie. So when we lie, we are actually sinning. But I think we talked from what Paul wrote to the Colossians, that when we have been baptized into Christ, we have put on a new self. And we have sort of taken out the old self. And the old self should go with lying. The old self should go with jealousy. The old self should go with every other sin that you can actually think about. When God comes in, the old self should go out. And the old self is the one that is directed by God. In the room where God is, Satan cannot be found there. So if we are going to discover that we still claim to be Christians, but we are still half God and half Satan, we haven't become Christians. In fact, that doesn't happen. You can't have God half side and Satan on the other side. Either we have one. We can have Satan in us, or we can have God in us, because the two don't dwell together. If you introduce God into yourself, surely Satan should disappear. But if you still have Satan in you, it means God has disappeared. Think about what happened to Saul, the king. When Saul was anointed to become king of Israel, God was with him. In fact, God chose him. And he asked Samuel to anoint him to become king. When you read 1 Samuel chapter 10, you are going to see him being anointed by Saul, and he actually became king. But later on in his life, when he allowed pride to overtake him, when he allowed disobedience to overtake him, the power of God, the spirit of God that had been put in him was actually replaced by the evil spirit. Because the power of God does not have any relation with the power of the devil. You remember in the book of Matthew, they actually talk about when they saw Jesus, casting out demons. Some of the Jews came and alleged and say, he is actually using the power of Beelzebub. In fact, by so doing, they were acknowledging, because they wanted to discount Jesus' power. He can't be using the power of God. He must be using the power of Beelzebub. And by so saying, they are actually saying he can't have the power of God in him. Rather, it's the evil power of Beelzebub in him. They are acknowledging that these two powers, they don't go hand in hand. They can't live in one room. The Philistines soon found out that could actually not happen. Verse 7 says, and when the men of Ashdod saw how things were, They said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is against us and against Dagon our God. What is interesting to me is this, and I think that's my next point. You know, religion can be so embedded in someone that even if he discovers the weaknesses of that religion, he would rather die defending it. The Philistines have actually observed that there is a God whose ark is causing harm to us. He has even caused harm to our Dagon, our God. But they would rather have this God go away and leave us with our God Dagon. And that's how religion can actually convert people. You know, there are people that actually go to the extremes, go to other countries, Asian countries in particular, India being one of them, Bangladesh and all those countries, where Christians are actually being killed. They are killed by those people who actually believe mostly the extreme Islamists. They actually believe in their Islamic Republic or Islamic religion, that they don't tolerate anyone else who don't believe in that. But we do believe, reading from the scriptures at least, that their belief and their religion is actually fault. But the owners don't see any fault in it. They would rather die in it. And this is also something that we need to be very careful about. What is it that I believe? The religion that I'm holding on to, is that the religion that is going to give me eternal life tomorrow? Because that's exactly what we are worried about. We are not worried about many, many things. The reason why we gather on the first day of the week and worship God, of course, the main reason is to break bread. Why do we break bread? We do break this bread because we are saying Jesus Christ's body, which was nailed on the cross, has caused me to be where I am, to be a Christian. What is my religion telling me to do? Religion can actually be embedded in people that even its weaknesses are going to be strength, even if it's going to be put against others. The Philistines discovered that their own God was weaker than this God. Instead of follow, why can I just follow this God? They actually did not do that. They would rather die in their belief. We have so many people, so many of your relatives, so many of my relatives, so many of our friends. Some of them perhaps we have taught them, some of them we have studied with them, but they've just decided to have nothing to do with God. You have told them how good it is to be in God, but how many have just spurned that and they don't want it. They would rather stick to what they are doing, even then, though they know it's destructive, but they would rather stick to that. Why not just follow the true God, since it had been discovered that he is the one who was powerful? They had discovered it. So verse 8 says, so they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines. They now want the ark to go away. And they said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? They answered, let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. So they brought the ark of the God of Israel there. And I like to end with this point here. I respect the Philistines, because when the Philistines discovered a problem in the camp, they did not fold their arms and hope for salvation from somewhere. They worked for the salvation themselves. What are we going to do? They became very inquisitive. And I would like each and every one of us to inculcate this, I would call it a gift of inquiring things. The reason why people of the world today, in the denominations, people can follow any kind of teaching is because people have ceased to be very inquisitive. Okay. If somebody just comes and they say they have started their church, that person is going to have followers. Why? He has followers because people don't inquire. They are not inquisitive. They don't care. Self-introspection. Let's ask things. When you tell me this, where are you getting it from? The Philistines are going to inquire. Now we have a problem at war. How do we solve this problem? They were able to identify that the ark of the God of heaven is the one that is causing the problem. So for us to go back to our normal life, let's take this ark away. If you continue reading the story, you are going to see how they did it. They did it immaculately, and the ark was able to get out of their vicinity. In fact, as you continue reading, when you go to the book of 2 Samuel, when David has become king, the ark had not yet come back to Shiloh, where it's supposed to be. It was somewhere there, but of course it's now in the territory of Israel. And David wanted to bring it to its proper place. David is going to copy what the Philistines had done when they brought it. We are talking of many, many years ago. This must be a story that was told and told and told again. Look at that impact. They made a new cart. And of course, they actually put in there two cows who had children at the back. But they still were able to go without coming back to their children, to their cows. And David is going to copy that. When he wants it to come, you remember the story, 2 Samuel chapter 6, when Asa is going to die. David is copying this. I think he must have seen something that was gold, something that was artful in the way Philistines had done it. Why am I talking so glowingly about the Philistines? Because of their ability to inquire. I have this problem. How do I solve the problem? Hillside is the church. Let me say as the Church of Christ. But you would know I didn't need to finish that. Hillside is a congregation of the Lord. When they have seen a problem, are we able to be like the Philistines, who sit down in a while and say, look, we have this problem. How are we going to get out of it? This morning, when we were behind them, 2 or 3 men talked about how thin we were on the ground. In fact, this is a problem that we have seen over time. I know my brother Keith, he made an acknowledgement that we were thin on the ground, and of course he talked about the effects of December. I really don't think it's really the effects of December. In fact, we have seen this problem as far back perhaps as January, that we are now thinning on the ground. Are we like the Philistines who are going to inquire and say this is a problem? How are we going to solve it? I remember not very long time ago, I talked about it. I actually talked about how thin we were going to become on the ground. And I, of course, suggested some things. I was hoping to see 1 or 2 of you coming to me and say, yes, your suggestion, let's put it into drive. It has actually died a natural death. I'm the one who is actually talking about it again after months and months. I know I'm perhaps going to be the first one to talk about it again after months and months, after years and years. What are we doing as Hillside? Now that we have seen a problem which has visited us, when the Philistines saw the problem, they worked on the problem. They were so artful to negotiate their way out of the problem. We have seen a problem. What are we doing as Hillside? What is in the plan, to actually get out of this problem? What are the 3 things that I shared with you this morning about this whole thing? The first was that when God wants to fight his battles, he does not need your help. When God is going to fight his enemies, he is going to fight alone. He does not need our assistance. In fact, this is one thing that should actually give us solace. That when we are facing problems as the people of God, we should be rest assured that the God that we believe in, when he has started to fight on behalf of his people, he really fights until the end of the war. In fact, when you are going to read the 5th chapter right up to the end, you are going to see that God is the only one who can sustain a battle for long. He can prolong his fight. As long as he wants to fight, he can sustain that without running out of ammunition, without running out of supply. This is the God that we should believe in. This is the God that we should call upon. This is the God that we should call into our lives. The second thing that we observed then was that if we have called upon this God, we should allow him to be with us. We should not call him half-heartedly, while my other half still belongs to the world. Because we have discovered that the God of heaven and the Dagons of this world don't go hand in hand. They don't live under one roof. They are completely different. If I am sincere to call upon this God, let me allow him to effect changes in my life. Let me not allow the Dagon to remain in my life. In this instant, the Dagon that I'm talking about will be the devil. Anything that is not coming from God will actually be called, by nickname of a Dagon. Then the last thing that we also saw is, as I am calling upon all of you as I'm ending this presentation, that this is one thing that we need to continue talking about. We need to continue thinking about. We have a problem in the house. How do we get out of this problem? The Philistines saw a problem in the house. They worked a way of getting out of the problem. Otherwise, the moment we stop thinking about ways of getting out of a problem, then we cease to function. It could be in your house. When you are seeing a problem, you don't have feast for the children. You don't sit back and hope that the heavens are going to open and give you money. That's not going to happen. You think around the problem. You work around the problem because you have identified that problem. Let's also continue identifying that problem. The problem of becoming thin on the ground. How can we work to plug that wall? Because it's a wall that we are looking at and we are actually not repairing it. It's going to continue to become bigger. Let's work like the Philistines. Be inquisitive and let's come up with solutions to the problems. I hope and trust that this presentation, I believe it was short, I hope and trust that it may actually help us to understand some of these aspects of God as we try to live and have him in our lives. Because without this God, then we are not going to have the future life, which is the eternal life that we are hoping to be part of tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening.